Joe, you want some water? No, I got it, but I would pour you some.
I'm good, thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brenda Daly, Director of the Center for Excellence in the Arts and Humanities. As you may know, this event tonight is part of our series, Places, Peoples, and Spatial Practices. After saying that a number of times, I've become quite good at it, but it's a little tricky. I'll make a couple of brief announcements. Books are for sale out beyond the door here, and I've dipped into a few, and Michael Martone is a writer of the Midwest, Indiana, Iowa even, Ames even, and often very funny. I laughed out loud, which is an unusual experience while reading. After the reading tonight, we will have bars and punch at the back. We invite you to join us for conversation. At this time, I would like to invite Joe Giha, who's in our creative writing faculty, or I should say was. He's now retired, to introduce our honored guest, Joe Giha.
Yeah, it's important. Was I've stopped grading the papers. That's the best part of it. I was. I won't tell you personal stories here. Michael Martone, my good friend, is a professor of English and director of the creative writing program at the University of Alabama. His 2000 book, The Flatness and Other Landscapes, won the Associated Writing Programs Award for Creative Nonfiction and part of the Center for Excellence in the Arts and Humanities series on places, peoples, and spatial practices. I think he could make a real interesting thing out of just that title, Spatial Practices. His new book is Double Wide, The Collected Fiction of Michael Martone. All I have on it is the title. But maybe he'll want to tell you some more about that in a minute. Michael has also taught at Syracuse University, Harvard University, and Iowa State University. He's the author or editor of numerous works that focus specifically on the Midwest, including the edited collections, A Place of Sense. Isn't the internet wonderful? You just get all this right down off there. Essays in Search of the Midwest, 1988, and Townships, Pieces of the Midwest, 1992. He's published 9 books, 2 chapbooks, and dozens of pieces of short fiction. And born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, he lives due south of his birthplace in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That's something else I picked up on the internet. It's interesting because that's the kind of thing Martone would fix on. If any of you know his writing, that's the kind of little detail. He gets these little details of connectedness. He connects things, and he does it in his fiction, and I think good fiction does that in many different ways. He does it in many funny ways, I think, too. Maybe even absurd, you might say. I'm not going to give any examples, so that's enough. Michael Martone.
Wow, great. Thanks for coming out. You're missing the office, and I hope you have, video stuff, so, and get the repeats. If it's Tuesday night, I hate to do Tuesday night because that's Gilmore Girls, and I don't even want to read on Tuesday night. But thanks for having me back to Iowa. It's been great to come back to see all the things that change and all the things that stay the same. Because of the series that I'm in, I'm going to read some nonfiction, 3 pieces actually, but like I say with my regular fiction reading, and I know some of you maybe haven't been to readings, so don't get excited. I write these things that have little pieces in, and so you can sort of listen, and then you can check out for a while. And the other thing we didn't mention, and I like to do this now. I was at a reading, and I looked up and I realized that the students in the audience were text messaging. And so, usually you say, turn off your cell phone, remember to turn off your cell phone. Right now, I'm saying to you, go ahead, turn your cell phones on. I will give you my number. It's 205-310-2932. And as the evening goes on, if you care to text message me, I would really appreciate that. And if you want to text message each other in the room, that's fine as well. Okay. All right. But just turn off the ringer if you can handle that. I'm going to start with an essay called "Country Roads Lined with Running Fences: A Dozen Story Problems about the Place of Place." Where to have lunch? One summer in Centerville, Iowa, I had supper in a restaurant on the largest town square in the world. At one time, chances were good that most town squares of the Midwest, there would be a steak place, a pizza parlor, a soda fountain, or a newsstand run by a Greek family. Perhaps the only indication was a special salad on the menu, or a gyro machine by the grill, or a fading picture of a white island in blue water tacked up on the wall. 10 years before, George, the restaurant owner, came to Centerville from the Peloponnesus. 10 years ago, by way of the Quad Cities, where he had family in the restaurant business. He worked most of the year, but shut down to return to Greece with his family every once in a while. He told me he had sent his wife and child back for good now, since he wants the boy to grow up there. One day, he thinks, he'll return for good. It's the winter he never could quite grow used to. Though Centerville has been very good for business, it can never be home. When I told him how much I liked traveling in Greece, how I looked to make it over there again soon, he did something remarkable. He scribbled down his name and address of his cousins in Athens, folks in his village, and told me where to find them, and when I was in Kalamata to look them up. Ask for Yorgos, he said. Say that you are from Iowa. 2. Iowa is where exactly? Actually, I'm from Indiana. That's where I was born and grew up. I know the feel of the Midwest, however. In Ireland, in Poland, in Italy, one can sense a loss and a resignation to the fact that much of the country's population now lives somewhere else. America as a nation has never suffered a diaspora, but natives of Iowa, of Indiana, and of the Midwest know this fate. Our migrations are internal, our shifts of population covered by an easy freedom to move about and an illusion that most places are the same or could be made to feel the same. Talking with George in Centerville, Iowa, reminded me of Greece, where most everyone has a friend or a relative who has gone away. And being reminded of that brought me back home, back to Iowa, to Indiana, to my Midwestern home, where people have not gone to a new country, but they have certainly gone away. 3. Where exactly is the Midwest? Where are its borders? What are the colors on the map? It depends on whom you ask. Iowans generally sketch roughly the Big 12 states, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and the Dakotas, as prime Midwestern states. Sometimes they will reach and even put Oklahoma as a Midwestern state. When asked about Indiana or Ohio, the usual consensus is that those places lie in the East. They are surprised to learn that Hoosiers think of the Midwest as the Big Ten: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and part of Iowa. Iowans want to know that what Easterners from Indiana would call what they call the Midwest, and I say the Plains, of course. It becomes more interesting when I ask that what defines a Midwestern state. It must be rooted in agriculture, Iowans say. I answered that it should be a balance between farming and manufacturing. They narrow their definition. The agriculture must be a special kind. It must be corn-based agriculture. Their definition of the Midwest derives from their home state, of course. It hasn't defined anything at all, but it has been shaped to fit the place. 4. Where exactly is the Midwest? We should perhaps be more interested in what the confusion reveals than in pinning down the actual boundaries of the place. Though it is probably wise to spend a few moments in definition. Again, where is the Midwest? And beyond that, what does that characterize of the region? How does it differ from other regions? Does it differ at all from other regions? There are important questions in developing a sense of place, I suppose. Perhaps we assign an identity too easily, use the names without thinking what we want to represent. Despite the confusion about its location, people agree that the Midwest is a good place to be from. It is as if we keep the region purposely vague in order to include as many people as possible as natives. I am from the Midwest. That coin is worth collecting. 5. What is the real question? So the real question is, why do so many of us want to be from a place that is nowhere and everywhere? The preposition is important, the from. Even those of us who still live in the Midwest, no matter how you define it, still would say that we are from the Midwest, as if its special properties rub off on us only at birth, and that since birth we have been getting further and further away from something. 6. What is what it is not? Dorothy realizes when she bumps down in Oz that she is not in Kansas anymore. If there is anything that characterizes a literature of the Midwest, it is the sense of discovery through absence. Nick Carraway, the narrator of F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, realizes as the story ends that it is a tale of the Midwest, and of Midwesterners in New York totally unequipped to live in the East. As the novel ends, he is preparing to return home. Leaving home, the Midwest, in order to see home, is clearly a driving force in the themes of Midwestern literature and life. Stories of the Midwest often begin at the moment of the turning back from afar, and the hero gaining sight for the first time of some distant beauty. Living in the Midwest, we know the truth about this coming and going. Many, many people have left, but few actually seem to return. Though Dorothy keeps demanding to be sent home, though she tells us once she is home that there is nothing like it, we are uneasy. It is a black and white world in Kansas. Why would any of us leave the Technicolor of Oz? 7. What does New Jersey have to do with anything? A friend who grew up in New Jersey noticed right away that the Midwest had no walls. There are picket fences, strung wire, cyclone mesh, the red staves of the snow fence, and I really, really was nostalgic today when I saw those snow fences out on that center. I remember asking the grounds crew to say, take down those snow fences, because, that's what causes the snow. So if you take down the snow fences, it won't snow. Okay, snow fence, chicken wire, barbed wire, even electric line. But there are no walls. My friend defines the Midwest that way, a country woven in wire fence. And he always argues that beyond the lack of boulders in the ground to build walls, the fences reflect something else inherent in the people who live here. You can see through fences, he says. They do not block out the subtle and endless beauty of the prairie and field, but at the same time the fence breaks up the vast and overwhelming horizon into bits of manageable places. The fence builders want it both ways. It's an aesthetic compromise between individual private property and being part of a neighborhood. A fence allows its builder to say, I am alone, separate, but not different. I've got nothing to hide, but don't come too close. It is a delicate balance. There are many such balances here between the individual and the community. The fences of the Midwest give us a tangible evidence of the web of these relationships. 8. What does the current disappearance of fences and fence rows tell us about the state of affairs now? The disappearance of fence rows could be written off to the use of larger machines with broader turning radii, the lack of animals on farms, the trouble of maintaining the wire, but does it reveal anything deeper? The simplest definition of place carries within it the notion of limits, of boundary. Part of what we believe as Americans, indeed what brought many people here in the first place, include the contradictory idea of a country unbounded, a place of limitless opportunity. In the realm of advertising's easy diction, you can have it all. The disappearances of physical fence in the Midwestern landscape might represent a transformation, a shift in interior space as well. A rickety, rusty wire fence was the product of a meeting between the irresistible force of individual enterprise and the immovable object of community. Fences snare and enmesh, but they are flexible, movable, many-gated. Their disappearance could signal to us the release of an unbridled force that is dangerous to community. An article in the Des Moines Register on the obsolescence of the township included a picture showing the entire government and voting body of a township in Iowa, a farmer, his wife, and their daughter. The question that arises is this: when does a town stop being a town? What is the critical mass of community? The presence of fences tells us finally that there are people here, that the land is divided up among them. As people have left the Midwest and the fences have come down, their absence does not bring people closer together, but only indicates that there is no one there to tend them. Someone will always own the land, but someone will not always be there to live there. 9. Where did they go? The roads that have taken people away can also be thought of in the same way as fences, as physical manifestations of our interior feelings about place and land. As we've seen, they are the quickest way out of town for our writers, our children, our friends, ourselves, but also they're the way back. Roads, too, form boundaries. The section roads lie like a net over the land. They divide it, they define it, they parcel it out. They impose the order on a place. But the road is also a common way owned by no one and everyone. When we think usually of the literature of the road, say of Kerouac, We think of the road as a conveyor, as something that moves through, something that is part of somewhere else. Yet it is also part of the things that stay put. We treat the road as Euclideans would have us treat a line, the distance between 2 points having no width. But the road, the sidewalk, the corners, the squares are rich with metaphorical meanings where once again the individual meets the group, where he or she is apart. The road may bound us, but it also binds us together. The road is a place itself, as a fence row is, and both must be thought of more like transmitting membranes, like skin, at once tough and intimate. 10. Can you be more specific? Good writing is always specific. Henry James wrote that good writing is selected perception and amplification. There is literally a world of difference between using one word over another, instead of the. As a writer selects a word, he or she is making a series of choices that includes or excludes parts of the world. William Faulkner called the county in Mississippi he wrote about his postage stamp of land. Though writers narrow and select, though they often cordon off precincts sacred to them, readers discover that within these boundaries there are areas of human experience that seem unlimited. Perhaps it is a quirk in the way we are made up, but it appears that the more specific a writer is, the easier it is for a reader to generalize. In geometry, we know that the finite plane bounded on all sides still contains an infinite number of points. Stories, poems, essays work that way too. The more tightly bounded it seems, the more restricted a work is, the richer we seem to find it. Author and authority are related words. To be an author of a specific place is, in a way, to be its God, its creator. But the place a God creates can never be as detailed as the larger world it is part of. For the writer faces the fact that he or she is a limited mortal. Writing, then, by its limitation, by acknowledging its human scale, still participates in something grand. The writer shares in the creation of the universe by creating a postage stamp. In Thornton Wilder's Our Town, a character receives a letter addressed to her, her street, her town, her state, her country, her planet, her solar system, and on until it ends finally, the mind of God. Her thrilled response is that it got here anyway. It got here. 11. Can you tell us a story? If books are like places, then places are like books. Let me tell you a story. I was helping a farmer during planting. I was driving a tractor, vibra-shanking a field of soybean stubble as the farmer followed behind me planting corn. The operation I was asked to do was an easy one, but I don't have any aptitude for machines, as Jane knows. I wound up during one pass almost sliding into a ditch of water when I tried to make the turn. Braking, I stalled the engine, and shaken, I couldn't get the thing in gear to start it up again. The farmer all the time was steadily catching up. The harder I tried to free myself and prove my competence, the worse things got. The farmer's son was working in the next field over. He yelled to me when he saw that I was in trouble and he was coming for help. In a few minutes, I saw him pulling down the ditch in a raft made of old fence posts, and he saved the day. There isn't much to the story. That's not why I told it. What is interesting is that when I visit that farm now, sooner or later that little story is told again, how Michael got stuck and Eric came to the rescue. Sometimes it is told to the people who haven't heard the story, but more often than not, we tell it to ourselves. It is as if the story is another building constructed a few springs ago. It's a part of the layout of the place, part of the map of the place. This little story takes its place with hundreds of others. The field where I had my adventure is called Cottonwood, for the tree that used to be there 60-some years ago. When Farmer Brown tells Eric to cultivate cottonwood, it is a one-word story. The tree no longer exists. The story does. Place exists in two dimensions. Places exist in two dimensions. They exist in the physical realm, but also in time. I will exist as part of a place on that farm as long as people there tell that story. Though the dirt, the ditch, the crops exist, a place needs a person to name it. Cottonwood. It is interesting that we call the documents that transfer land deeds and titles. The land itself carries its own deeds and titles. To gain a sense of place is to be sensitive to the stories about places. And 12, here's your hat, what's your hurry? A sense of place is a complex idea further confounded by our relationship to it. We will labor to resolve two opposing forces in our lives. On one hand, we have a desire to be rooted, to belong, literally to belong in a place. On the other hand, we wish to be free of those connections, to keep moving through. As with all compelling conflicts, this one is not easily resolved, probably not to be resolved. People now move far more than they stay put, but by moving, we find it easier to ignore those limits imposed on our lives. The fences on either side of the road seem more like a chute channeling us to some wonderful, fantastic future. To have a sense of place is to sense limits, to sense our own deaths, a specific plot of ground where we will be buried and where our bodies will become part of the plot of ground. By accepting the limits of a place, the place imposes, we gain the ability to leave a mark. And by being part of a place, we become it. Thanks. So those are the 12 questions. So now, that's okay. You're still with me, right? It's okay. You can take a breather, walk, do a text message, whatever. Are you guys in the back there? Are you getting extra credit for this? Yes? Good. I lived in Ames. Oh my gosh. I lived in Ames. Oh my gosh. I just lost my voice. I lived in Ames from 1980 to 1987 or so, over on 2nd Street, which isn't too far away from the rail line. I like trains. And so I thought I would read something about trains. Can you hear me okay if I drop down a bit? And it's really about the sound that the trains make. And of course, living in Ames, you know that. You know how many trains come through town. 40, 50 a day. And it was great. One time I was on Duff, just waiting for a train to go by. As it went by, and this was back when it still had cabooses. You young kids today, you don't remember the cabooses, but they were the last car on the train. As it went by, right by old Munn Lumber, the train broke apart. And these guys were in the caboose, and they were like, what the heck happened? And as the caboose sort of stopped and the train kept going. And it was really great. Anyway, so trains in Ames. So I thought I would read a little piece about the sound the trains make. And it's called G sharp minor 7th in the second inversion. G sharp minor in the 7th conversion. G sharp minor 7th in the second conversion. That's the sound that a train makes. Word has just reached us in Tuscaloosa that in Halberstadt, Germany, 2 pipes have been removed from a bulwark organ in St. Buchardi's church, silencing a pair of E's that have been contributing to a chord playing continuously for the last year and a half. The keys are stuck and struck in a position by lead weights. The newly created chord will play until sometime in the year 2008. This is but a fragment of a 639-year-long piece, a concert of a John Cage opus called As Slow as Possible. Have you heard of this? Yeah. Now the new note will sound for 18 more months, I hear. Cage is most famous for the way he orchestrates the extremes of music. His chamber work, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, consists, of course, of a performer or performers sitting in silence for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. As Slow as Possible began with 20 months of silence, a rest of 20 months. Or more exactly, a rest where the only sound was the panting of the organ's electric bellows. I am fond of this admittedly high conceptual piece. I admire its hopeful nature, its assumption that someone not only will be around to play the final notes of the coda, but that someone will be around to hear the silence that follows after it. The movements last 71 years each, full lifetimes. There will be others present as time goes on to sound and sustain the decades-long chords, the harmonize with the apparently endless tonics, to engage the score for scores and scores of years. I think about that newly constructed chord sounding right now, still sounding, often. Listen, I live near trains, and their timely and timeless concerts seem to be a kind of folk version, an unself-conscious rendition of the avant-garde tooting going on in Germany. I live near the old Southern Main Line, the Fertile Crescent that connects New York to New Orleans, and near what was once the marshalling yards of the L&N, where long drags, that's what they're called, of freight cars arrive and are broken apart, reassembled, and depart for Mobile or the Midwest. I said I live near trains, but the truth is that we all live near trains. We've learned to ignore them, don't really take notice of them as they shuffle along their corridors of ruins, not until we are inconvenienced at a crossing where they emerge out of some back lot of history and of obsolescence. Or maybe you still notice the sound the train makes. More likely, their ambient industrial music, too, has been naturalized, filtered efficiently by your attentions, the sound suppressed, sidetracked. Anytime a train moves or stops moving, it sounds its horn, little coded melodies that can be read, deciphered, stitched into fragments of a phrase, a shave and a haircut, 2 bits, another visitation from some long ago cultural past. Down in the yard right now, there is a duet going on, a kind of melancholy argument, probably between the local switch engine and the road engine just arriving from Vicksburg. Muted schwas, wah-wahing, wailing, each trying to find a kind of final punctuation. The contemporary compressed air horn, still pitched in the low minor key of the earlier steam whistle, is less expressive than steam. In steam, the engineer could show his hand, slow his hand, manipulate the duration and dynamic, the warble and waver with a tug of a cord. The modern horn has a less play, hobbled by the binary toggle switch, slightly less soulful, but still. The notes reaching me now from the main line are still that ancient concocted cocktail bawling. In fact, that long throat-clearing burst, clearing the tracks is the first note of the highballing varnish, expediting southward, just entering the urban pas de deux. And even in the joy of going, the note lingers endlessly, depressed and amped up all the way through town, warning, crossing after crossing of its crossing, pushing the sound ahead of it, a gulp and then another blast, hiccuping as it glides into the station on Greensboro Avenue. How strange to have this music always there, background, foiled and foiling. It saturates the air everywhere, disembodied and massive, a moving wall, a kind of static, yet with distant, distinct eruptions of a phrase, a fragment that first asserts, then loses its train of thought. Transmitted through the invisible air, the hidden source is more often on the move, restless, remote, receding, leaving this polyphonic note floating in its wake. The sound has no origin, it just seems to spring, silence wrapped to sound, a steaming, streaming audio geyser. For a long time in its schedules, Amtrak printed a little footnote about the procedures for transporting human remains on its trains. The sounds trains make were meant to warn or communicate mundane information, signals before the wireless. But those practical sounds morphed into our constant ululation, our wallpaper keening, our diesel funeral dirge, our mechanical muzak of mourning. It is the perfect accompaniment, hard now to distinguish that sound from our general, sustained, steeped sadness. It is seemingly incorporated into our emotional wiring, our ambient ache, the sound from the track, our bereft, looping soundtrack. Time is coming at you. Time is leaving you behind. The Doppler yodel emanates from the hulking shadow racing with it. Hard on its hills, there's where the southern crossed the dog. It is a warning that gets swallowed up by a sigh, a sob, and somewhere out there, forever after, the silence. All right, 2 down. We're almost done. I think I can make it. So nice. I like postcards, and there are some people in the audience I know who've received postcards from time to time, and I apologize for that. Don't feel like you have to answer postcards. That's what I like about postcards. I was telling Joe that postcards are a lot like prayer. You know, you don't really expect answers. I mean, you just send them out, and that's what they are, little missives. This is what I'm doing. But I thought I would end this sort of discussion of place by thinking about postcards in their connection to place. And that's where we'll finish up here. And then we'll go have bars, whatever, we'll have bars, or go to the bar. 17 postcards from Terra Incognita. Numbered, I guess, too, you'd like me to have questions after? Okay. I mean, if you want to ask. 17 postcards from Terra Incognita, numbered in the way they were written, not in the way they were delivered. And that's always cool, right, with mail. You can write 3 postcards and number them and everything, but you'll get 2, 1, 3. I mean, so I thought I'd do that. 1 of 17. Wish you were here. The poignancy of postcards stems from that expressed or at least implied desire. Wish you were here. Penned from here, it is so not there, yet addressed to a you, important enough to make the you who writes the postcard forgetful of the here where the you writes. You can read it later. It doesn't make a sense, but to write a postcard is to actually, in the midst of your not being there, but being here, transport yourself to a there of the address. The genre of postcards embeds an address in its text like a ghazal insists upon encoding the poet's name into the verse. To write a postcard is to caption the caption of the postcard, to continually locate and place yourself in a place all the time, imagining another place, the there of the recipient. 2 of 17. Thinking of you. The postcard is place inscribed, dramatized, and actually animated. It is a place that moves, a piece of place that has broken off, and I like to break the prescribed boxed boundary of the space. This space for message. I write on the photo, verso. I arrow on the window, the 3rd floor, 3rd from left. I affix this legend, I am here. There are other windows on the card. Think, the stamp is the postcard's postcard. Thinking of you. Indeed, thinking of you there, thinking of me here, wishing you were here with me there with you. The postcard is a koan of place, our having to be somewhere in our relationship to place and to each other. It is a place in and of itself, thinking of you, wish you were here. 5 of 17. Why Fort Wayne? It is hard to imagine now, but for a while this plot of ground was to die for. 3 American forts were built there, 4 French, 3 British. The Miami and Shawnee each had fortified villages. There were massacres, ambushes, running battles, forced marches, insurgencies, sieges, conflagrations, surrenders, torture. Spy Run Creek, it is said, ran red with blood. This place was, for a while, geopolitically present, and a place always contains its component of time. A strip of 10 miles of land, a continental divide, actually, that separates the Great Lake Basin from the Mississippi Valley, was strategic if one moved around by water. But we long ago no longer moved around by water, and this contested portage overnight became quite literally just another backwater. No longer bothered to defend. Attention shifts and drifts through time. It lights on and lights up a place for an instant. Now you see it, now you don't. 3 of 17. There is no here. I love the map pieced together from the satellite photo. Like postcards, the montage of the satellite photos, like postcards representing the United States at night. Do you know that map? You know that map at night of the United States? There are the great globs of light, dendritic phosphorescent tendrils netting up metropoli, the pearlescent bacterial glowing cultures. And then there's this negative space, the absence of light, the empty negated vastness. I imagine that in that black blankness, the grid of place is waiting to be sparked, to be lit up, that it is a story or a poem that provides the juice. Switch it on. How does a place become a place? Donald Barthelme, in The End of the Mechanical Age, imagines God as a meter reader and tells us that grace is not like electricity, it is electricity. Let there be light. Right, light, and there is light. 4 of 17. Look out there. Once flying at night from coast to coast, I happened to look out the window and spotted the burning blots spotting, their shimmering splatter radiating on the ground below. There, suddenly, was Fort Wayne, all its distinguishing features in place, the quirky cant of its downtown street grid askew, looking like itself assembled itself before my eyes into a here down there. 6 of 17. The necropolis leads the metropolis. City planners once imagined that cities, civilization itself, sprang from our ancestors' decision to settle down. Time was right to build a town, and so they stopped moving around and built a town. But I like the new theory promoted by the trade that cities were a consequence of something other than a conscious shift away from hunting and gathering, slashing and burning. No, humans first changed their practice of burial. They began to bury the dead, and tending the graves stopped the migratory nature of humans. Bury the dead, and this precipitates the living out of the flow. They hole up. They have to tend the dead. Tending the dead necessitates construction of shelter. That spurred agriculture, the undertaking of specialized individual tasks. The necropolis leads the metropolis, you see, not the other way around. Oh, it's a chicken or egg thing, I realize, but I like the notion of tending the dead. Tending the dead. The job description of a writer attuned to a steady erosion, the steady evaporation of details of time and place, of everything and everyone's replacement. Stories can be thought of as vast cemeteries of past place, affixed now in a neat row of print. How does a place become a place? Perhaps through an accumulation of stories, a plot defined by plots. 7 of 17, the Blue Light Special. You know the Blue Light? Kmart? Boxing Day, 1965. On the spur of the moment, Earl Bartell, I'm not making this up, folks, the manager of the Fort Wayne Kmart, taped a flashing blue lantern he got from the sporting goods to some scrap 2x4 lumber and created the first Blue Light Special. The flashing light marked the spot of some holiday paper he was looking to unload. The sale had been advertised, announcements had been made, but the customers were having difficulty finding the location of the reduced stock. People had become lost in the store. The blue light was a navigating beacon, strobing orientation. The customers navigated the cramped, crowded aisles toward the discount breast of the not-so-new world. At least the next year's promised presents. The place I write about, Fort Wayne, is the place where the Blue Light Special was created. I, like Gatsby, another Midwesterner, believe in the ecstatic future. I believe in the blue light. It is both illuminating and illustrative. 8 of 17, the Indiana Sky. There is this shorthand for place employed in prose, the adjectival sky. He walked out under the Indiana, the Iowa, the Illinois, the Idaho sky. An efficient way to indicate place of a story, setting it, naming it. But really, would we know an Indiana sky if we saw it? Or if in a story we read the Indiana sky, what would we see? What would be conjured up in our imagination? That is to say, place can certainly be named, but in merely naming it, can it be known? 10 of 17, sky writing. Look up, start again, look up Art Smith, the bird boy of Fort Wayne, on the internet. It is said that he was the first to successfully complete the outside loop, the loop-to-loop. He died in an airplane crash in an Indiana cornfield. Art Smith, it is said, was the first to write in the sky. The Indiana sky above the Indiana cornfields, marking the severely clear azure blue with a cloudy cursive script. What did it say? That goes unrecorded, and besides, it is too far away to read in the letters. The words are already smearing, streaking, disappearing. The ascender on what appears to be a B is evaporating. The apex of an A is now merely a dull smudge. The sky arrives above our heads, transparent, generic, unremarkable. It is sky. By definition, over everywhere, everything. It must be branded, a proprietary geography of invisible air. 9 of 17, the dumbest city in America. From Fort Wayne, my mother calls me in Alabama to tell me that Fort Wayne has been designated by Men's Health magazine as the dumbest city in America. It seems to have been done scientifically with graphs and categories and surveys, the number of Nobel Prize recipients, library books circulating, SAT scores. What she asks is, what are you going to write about this? It seems one thing I've written about this. It seems one thing I have written about this is to use the occasion of Fort Wayne's designation as the dumbest city in America as an anecdote in a paper to be delivered at Iowa State University that meditates on the elusiveness of place. I don't know, I tell her. By definition, my response can't be very, smart. I'm influenced by the influence of place, a son of dumb. How does the brain think about itself? Stupid is as stupid does, Forrest Gump's mother says. In Alabama, when it comes to lists, Alabamans say, and this is true, thank God for Mississippi. I want, at this juncture, to pun on dumb, to say something about how Alabama gives voice to the notion of place, that that place, Alabama, has placeness. A silence inhabits the whole regions of the world. Fort Wayne, Indiana, for instance. That kind of dumb. In the silence in which some places are steeped, someone will articulate the vacuum, struck dumb by dumb luck. 11 of 17, the city of blue trucks. Fort Wayne is the world headquarters of North American van lines, whose distinctive sky blue rigs wander lonely as clouds, continually through the city, waiting for a berth. You see them orbiting on the bypass, idling in the far reaches of parking lots, a herd of them huddled together, air brakes sneezing, running lights running. They come to a hub to shift and sort their reload their loads, to pool, then peel away again, pulmonary pods, heaping beasts. Growing up, I like to think of the drifting blue trucks, counting them instead of sheep, each of them, I imagine, tarred with another living room or parlor, each trailer transporting a suspended domestic setting, each trailer dreaming of itself. Animated places crept by, a place parade, a parade of place, places looking for places to go and then going. The whole country, in individual dots and dashes, circulated through my city, the furnishings of its atriums entering the chambered city, this contracting, this expanding heart, and then in another blue beat or two, beat it out of town. 12 of 17, the happiest city in America. In 1948, Look magazine designated Fort Wayne as the happiest city in America. I asked my mother, who is pictured on the cover with a group of high school girls huddled laughing at a soda fountain, what is the source of all this happiness? Is it in the water? In the air? Where did it go? She asks her picture. The photos of the photo spread. The photographer had no need to ask anyone to smile. 15 of 17, on the planet of the apes. Where are you from, Dr. Zaius, the suspicious ape in the movie of the Planet of the Apes, asked Charlton Heston. The maroon, confused astronaut warily responds, Fort Wayne. And the theater goes bananas, where we watched, in Fort Wayne, howling, raucous, primate applause. I believe we all wanted the film to stop and start over again and return to the place again where a made-up character uttered this made-up hometown that happened to coincide with our real hometown. I have heard people on vacation visit fictional places, send postcards from such places, greetings from Green Gables, say, or Sunnybrook Farm, say, or Fields of Dreams, places that have become, through fiction, real. This real place, Fort Wayne, is authenticated by a bit of fiction within a fiction. Where are you from? The ape asks. Fort Wayne, Moses answers. The Promised Land. Me too, we all respond. Me too. 13 of 17, a sense of place. We often speak of a sense of place, that a piece of writing can, at best, approximate a place, suggest the sensations of the surroundings, suggest a sense of sensing. The story stimulates at best, and perhaps needs only to stimulate a vague peripheral nimbus of locale, and that is enough to satisfy. A sense of place suggests our alienation from place. It puts us in our place, about place. We approach the world on a tack, askanced, nuanced, alien and alienated, receding. It's just out of reach. 16 of 17, a bottle and a message. Once I got a coconut from Hawaii. Its hull was hulled with stamps. My address in the stamp, the only message. From the Smoky Mountains, I sent a little souvenir, a toy black bear crafted in a tiny balsa wood box. Often postcards are not about words alone, not the message in the bottle at all. The bottle itself is the message. The medium and the means of transportation transporting the places temporarily inhabited. Once the Postal Service would deliver almost anything from anywhere if you had enough postage. That was true until September 11th. You could send anything by mail if you had enough stamps. I always wanted to send a door. Unhinged and varnished with stamps, a souvenir of a place I once entered or left. Instead, in hotel rooms now, the one upstairs, I strip the door of that framed legal notice encrypted with the information that a safe will be provided, that a traveler cannot knowingly defraud the innkeeper, and use it as a souvenir postcard, an accurate indicator of where I'm at, where I've been. This explains everything, I write, an illustration of explanation. I write, wish you were here. 17 of 17, ephemera. A correspondent writes to me that the disposition of my postcards to him after his death is recorded in a codicil of his will. His letters will be donated with his other papers, his ephemera, to his college library. The postcards, on the other hand, will be destroyed, not storable correspondence. I can have my cards back, he says, a special clause. And I can. I mean, as soon as he dies, I can call up and say, I'd like those cards back. My postcards will come back to me from another time, another place of place. Postcards, it seems, are not kept indefinitely, fleeting even in their afterlife. One can imagine bundles of letters, but postcards, with their association of time out of time, of recreation and vacation, perhaps seem not archival, mere temporaries. Do you toss postcards? Will you toss this one, the one you are reading now? Is there a shelf life for postcards have once they arrive? It is their cheapness, their expediency, their brevity, their utter lack of seriousness, their spontaneity, the half-life of their decay, a flashing isotope compared to the real radiation of a letter or the place itself pictured on the card, its edges already foxed with age. 14 of 17. The city of conductors. Fort Wayne was a division point for all the railroads that once ran through it. The Pennsy, the Wabash, the Big Four, the Nickel Plate, the New York Central, the Monon. And the streets of the downtown were clotted by conductors, passenger train conductors in their black serge uniforms, freight conductors in their stiff bib denim. They moved in time, on schedule with the trains, consulting their railroad pocket watches, carrying their tool bags and flares, their ticket punches and key rings. And next door to everyone who was not a conductor lived, who worked strange hours on long drags to Chicago or Lima, or bid highballing varnish to Indianapolis or Cleveland. Next door to us was a conductor, Mr. Kelker, who had lost both hands cleanly cut off in an accident. He'd tell us stories, how the city was once a city of conductors, how it felt once to hold time in your hands, and how it felt to live there in what was once a destination, and how it felt once to feel how it felt, now to feel the phantom feel of that fleeting feeling, the subtle texture of absence, the heft of loss, the substantial mass of all that nothing in your hands. Thank you very much. Any questions? Or no questions. Yeah?
Comments?
Any? No? Oh, you're such an Iowa crowd. There's but you're from Pennsylvania, so that's.
Where, if you thought about where you'd like to be buried.
I was really disappointed in moving away from here because I had dibs on a plot out there, in that graveyard out there. I think a lot about where. Don't you think a lot about where you're going to end up?
Crosses my mind.
It does, yeah. No, I mean, what I do want though is wherever I'm going to be buried, I do want to go back by train. And I was I was sitting at the Memphis airport, not this trip, but the trip before, and you can look out and watch them loading the luggage. 3 coffins went on, so that was pretty neat, that you weren't quite alone riding, I mean, yeah.
Michael, where do you go to get a perspective on Alabama?
Where do
you go that you get a perspective on?
Well, I don't know if I have yet. Even though I've lived there 10 years, I really haven't written about Alabama. And in the Alabama problem, I mean, for kids in Alabama, it's very weird. I was saying this earlier today, that if the kids in Alabama, if they say, oh, I'm going to write about Alabama, everybody says, well, what took you so long? Because it's obvious to everybody in Alabama that of course you'd write about Alabama. It's a completely interesting place. The interesting phenomena of the Midwest is when I say I write about Fort Wayne, people say, well, why? Or I'm going to write about Iowa. Well, it doesn't have that. So it's an interesting difference in those two places. But of course, my students in Alabama, the Alabama students who are writing about Alabama, they have a different set of problems. They have to work through this incredible literature, Faulkner and O'Connor and all that. I mean, in Indiana, it's relatively easy. I got Vonnegut and maybe Booth Tarkington and a little bit of Dreiser, but the whole influence thing is completely different as well. Yes, Joe?
Could you tell us something about Double Wide?
Oh, it's just Double Wide is all the stuff that's out of print, that's back into print. And a lot of you are going to be writers. One of the things you got to do as a writer is, boy, you got to, nobody's going to take care of those dead bodies. You got to find ways to get those back into print. And here's a little thing for the cocktail party afterwards. Do you know about the Thor tool decision of 1977? Sure you do. Now you do. Before 1977, books and book publishing had a special dispensation. That is, you could store books in your warehouse and not be taxed. But, if you're a car dealership or a tool manufacturer and you have inventory in your warehouse, you're going to be taxed on that inventory. And so a tool company sued and said, that's not fair. We want the same deal books have. Books are just like tools. Well, they're not, but the Supreme Court in 1977 said, yes, they are. And so it's in 1977 that the book publishing companies changed completely. And that's why when I published my first book with a New York publisher, a commercial publisher, in 1984, the book was out of print in 6 months because it wasn't selling enough to justify its tax basis in a warehouse. And so all of those stories, or most of those stories, were published in places that went out of print instantly because they didn't sell enough. And before 1977, the valuable part of a publishing company was its backlist. That it completely sold a few copies of all the backlisted titles. After 1977, what became the important part of publishing was the front list. And so the backlist was actually a liability. And so they got rid of it. So, probably a lot of you are living in houses now that are insulated with books. That's what happens to them. They get pulped into insulation. So Double Wide is like another attempt to get these things back in print. So that's all. It's a collection of all the stuff that are from previous books. A couple new things, but yes.
Mike, you were saying it's difficult for you to get a perspective on Alabama, but when you came to Ames, you immediately got a sense of place. Is that because of your Indiana experience?
Well, I don't know if I got a sense immediately of, even when I was here, I was still writing about Indiana. All my colleagues could tell you that. They were bored to tears about that. But what I did do when I came here, I grew up in Fort Wayne, which is surrounded by some pretty good farm stuff. I said, I got to find out about this place, and the woman who's sitting right next to you was one of my students, and I said to her, I was terrible. I said, can I come out and visit your farm on the weekend? And, I'll work. And so I did. And that's how I sort of got to know this place, just by sort of trying to live hard in it, I think. But I didn't really write about it until after I left after 7 years. I think at least for me, I think that's the case. I don't know if that's true of everyone. There's something, when you read something, this is a little confession, when you read something And in the thing that you're reading, there's a mention of a house. You know, like John walked into his house. Do you, in your mind, picture a house? I call it the reading house. Now, when you continue reading, you know, in the house that I see is at 1730 Spring Street in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Why that one? I've lived in a lot of houses, but 1730 Spring Street is my default setting for a house. And so, you know, but if the text says, oh, it has a sliding patio door, my house doesn't have it, but in my mind I can put those patio doors in, you know? I mean, just because that's what I'm imagining. So I was wondering, why was it 1730 Spring Street and not 1812 Clover Lane or 8222 Northwood Park Drive? Why was it that house? And I realized that was the house where I learned to read. And so when I first read, John walked into the house. I mean, when I first could do that, it was in that house. And that's been I think that's an interesting sort of way of, I mean, why is it that certain places sort of stick to you and others don't? And Alabama, in some ways, I don't know, in some ways it just hasn't yet. It's only been 10 years, but and there's plenty to do still in Indiana, so. Any other thing? No? Well, what? Well, yeah. I mean, well, that's what I was trying to say, that even in a bounded space, that's the great paradox of geometry, right? In a bounded space, there's an infinite number of points. Even though it's supposedly limited, in fact, it's unlimited. So, and that's, a lot of people discover that. So, yep.
The last piece that you read, in one of the sections, you made mention of what might be this lecture.
Uh-huh.
So did you write that with this in mind?
No, huh? No. You know, for me, it's all like, you know, your stereo system. It's all components. You know, it's a plug in, plug out. So, yeah. No, in fact, I think Darcy's already heard that lecture already. So, but I mean, that's another thing for you writers in there. You know, I never understood why writers, you know, think like they can only use stuff once. It's back to double wide. Keep using it over and over again. You know, I mean, if you've got like a good bit, it's always funny with writers. They always like, oh, they had a great idea, and they always like save it for the end and only use it once. You should use it all the time. I mean, if I only have one advice for writing or to thinking about this stuff, is don't do anything half-assed. The greatest line in Shakespeare is never, 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 never. King Lear. I mean, it's great. Isn't that a great line? Not 3 times, not 4 or 5. Get it? It's never, says Lear. It's never. So, you know, I just love repetition, and don't throw anything out. And it can all be used over and over again. Don't you think? Yeah. I mean, it's all about obsession. I mean, look at these paintings. My God! She's working it, you know? She's working it. I'll try blue this time. Okay. Well, thanks again. Have some bars. Sorry, you want me to sign something?
Whisper to me and I'll read it.
Hi.
Hi, Patrick. City of
I can't talk to him in person. I can only send him messages on Facebook. Huh? Yeah. We're all set. I told him.
Here's the work and here's the response, and as you should be. But some people are so trained, they really do want to beat up. Arrows in so actually got one lead, Alabama.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there's like some guys who've been there, don't know.
Nobody ever left the workshop about problems. Nobody's problems. It's like the John Mark.